Hello everybody, welcome to the Hermetic Initiates. Today we will be going over Valentine's Day since it is the season of love and the day is upon us. We will start this episode off with a little history of the day and end it with some alchemical references and rituals that we can put into our own practices. I hope you all enjoy, and don't forget to hit that subscribe. Okay, initiates, so we will start today's journey with Juno Februtis. Juno Februtis is an aspect of that great Roman goddess as a purifier and fertility goddess, who is especially connected with the month of February and the festivities in its later half. She would later seem to be related to Juno Lucinia as a childbirth goddess. February was the month of purification to the Romans because in their early calendar it was the last month of the year and so considered an appropriate time to get rid of the bad, stale, or unclean in preparation for the new year. The references to Juno Februtis are few, however, and much of the information about her would seem to be more recent derision. So, February takes its name from the Latin februa, meaning religious purification, and so means the month of purification or the cleansing month, referring to the numerous festivals of that theme held then, especially the Lupercalia in the early days of the lunar calendar. March, as the month when the spring takes hold, had been thought of as the first month of the year, and so many holidays in the last half, the waning half of February, centered around the theme of endings, including their Terminalia on the 23rd, honoring Terminus, the god of boundary stones. The 23rd, for whatever reason, the reason had a ritual significance as the last day of the year. Even though the next month mostly held 28 days in a lunar calendar, the months are aligned with the moon phases. But since the lunar cycle fits really imprecisely into the solar wind, off by 11 days, every other year or so, depending on the system, an entire extra month is added to keep it or less in sync, and the Terminalia had been the traditional time for doing so. The Lupercalia, held on the 15th, was a very ancient and very popular holiday that included rituals to purify the city of Rome and bring fertility to it. The celebrations were centered on Palestine Hill, where the twins Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, were said to have originally settled. On this day, a goat or goats and a dog were sacrificed. From the skin of the goats were made loincloths, which were the only clothing worn by certain groups of young men who ran the bounds of the city carrying whips, also made from sacrificed goat skins. With these, they hit the people that they came across. This exact act was thought to not only drive away the bad, but also to draw in the good in the form of fertility for the people and for the city in general. And it is said that women hoping to get pregnant or looking for an easy time in childbirth would deliberately put themselves in their way so that they could be hit. Plutarch, who lived in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE when the Lupercalia was in full swing, said that the Lupercalia was so heavily involved with purification, the day was called Februata, or Dies Februata, the day of purification. Incidentally, in the same passage, he mentions a Greek ritual of purification called Perskylokismos, in which the person to be purified was rubbed all over with puppies, apparently because puppies absorbed bad vibes. Though he doesn't say so, unlucky little guys were probably thought of as scapegoats and sacrificed later to Hecate or someone such, which is no good at all, no sir. But I don't see why Persiculismos couldn't be revered in a more modern form without the sacrifice. Can you imagine a similar, more giggly, squirmy fun time than to be purified by having someone rub puppies all over you? The Parentalia, or Festival of the Ancestors, was held from the 13th to the 21st of February, and during this holiday, offerings were given to the dead, especially on the Fernilia on the 21st, when the D-mains, the divine and powerful dead, were propitiated. According to Ovid, this was part of the purification ceremonies of the month, because once the dead have had their due, the city can then move on to matters of the living, and the season is again clean. I have always thought it rather nice that on the 22nd, after the ancestors and dead family members had been honored, the Romans turned to the living family and celebrated the Eucharistia, when family reunions were held, and it was traditional to settle family arguments or feuds. Another one of February's cleansing holidays was the Refugium, the Flight of the King, on the 24th. Which was said to commemorate when the last king of Rome was driven out, the monarchy gave way to the republic, a cleansing of a different sort. Ovid, in his Fasti, or account of festivals, written in the early 1st century CE, does not mention a Juno Frebutus in February, as one might expect. He does mention Juno Sosapita, Severus, as presiding over the calends, or the first day of the month. But this is hardly unique, as Juno was said to preside over all the calends. In his entry for the Lupercalia, he refers to Lucinia as childbirth goddess, praising her for fertility of the day. So that leaves me with two questions. Where does Lupercalia originate, and how does Christianity take its part? Okay, so Wikipedia says the name Lupercalia was believed in antiquity to evince some connection with the ancient Greek festival of the Akkadian Lycaea, a wolf festival, and the worship of the Lycaean Pan, assumed to be a Greek equivalent to Phanes, as instituted by Evander. So let's see. What is this Akkadian Lycaea festival about? In ancient Greece, the Lycaea was an archaic festival with a secret ritual on the slopes of Mount Lycaon, the Wolf Mountain, the tallest peak in rustic Arcadia. The rituals and myths of this primitive rite of passage centered upon an ancient threat of cannibalism and the possibility of a werewolf transformation. For the Epephoboi, a Greek term for a male adolescent, who were the participants. The festival occurred yearly, probably at the beginning of May. These adolescent boys, Wolfezeus is assumed by Zeus. The epithet Lycaeos, Wolfezeus, is assumed by Zeus only in connection with the Lycaea, which was the main Arcadian festival. Zeus had only a formal connection as patron of the ritual. In the founding myth of the Lycans, banquet for the gods that included the flesh of a human sacrifice, perhaps one of his sons, Nyxamidas, or his grandsons Archaeus, Zeus overturned the table and struck the house of the Lycan with a thunderbolt. His patronage at the Lycaea can have been little more than a formula. Long afterwards, in the late 3rd century CE, the philosopher Porphyry reported that Theophrastus, a Greek philosopher, had compared the sacrifice at the Lycaea in the Arcadia with the Carthaginian sacrifices to Moloch. The ritual was nocturnal, to judge from the name of Nyxamidas, that was given to the son of Lysias, who was killed and served up as part of the feast to Zeus. Rumors of the ceremony that circulated among other Greeks revolved around the theme of human sacrifice and cannibalism. According to Plato, a particular clan would gather on the mountain to make a sacrifice every 9 years to Zeus Lycaeus, and a single morsel of human entrails would be intermingled with the animals. Whoever ate the human flesh, who was said to turn into a wolf, and could only regain human form if he did not eat again of human flesh until the next 9-year cycle had ended. The traveler Pausanians told of an Olympic boxing champion, Damascus of the Parsesia, who had turned into a wolf at the sacrifice to Zeus Lycaeus, and changed back into a man again in the 9th year thereafter, from which Walter Bachart affirms that for Germicius to have successfully participated at least 9 years later, the participants in the ritual feast must have been these young adolescent boys. There were several sites at the summit on Mount Lycaean. Pausanians saw the ash pile altar to Zeus, but as attending the rite was impossible, he was obliged to let it be as it is and as it was from the beginning. Near the ancient ash heap where the sacrifices took place was a forbidden precinct in which allegedly no shadows were ever cast. Anyone who entered would have to be sacrificed. There was the cave of Rhea, the Creatia, where according to local legend, Zeus was born and cared for by the nymphs. There were games associated with the satisfactory completion of the Lycaea, which removed in the 4th century to Megalopolis, when it was founded in 371 BCE. Megalopolis was the first urbanization in rustic Arcadia. There, the major temple was dedicated to Zeus Lycaeus. Through the Arcadians continued to sacrifice on the mountaintop to Pausanians day, 2nd century CE. Modern archaeologists have found no trace of human remains among the sacrificial detritus, but recent discoveries at the mountaintop ash heap altar that Pausanians saw but was reluctant to pry into reveal that it was much older than the classical Greeks themselves realized. Early 20th century excavations at the site had revealed nothing earlier than 700 BCE. But the Greek-American interdisciplinary Mount Lycaean excavation and survey project excavated a trench and detected ritual presence at the site at the beginning of the 3rd millennium BCE, 1,000 years before Zeus was worshipped in Greece. The late Menenian rock crystal seal bearing the image of a bull was a notable surprise. That is crazy. Our ancestors are so primal. So, how did we take human sacrifice and turn it into a Christian ritual? Okay, so Saint Valentine, Saint Valentino, was a 3rd century Roman saint, commemorated in Western Christianity on February 14th and in Eastern Orthodoxy on July 6th. From the High Middle Ages, his saint's day has been associated with the tradition of courtly love. He is also a patron saint of tyranny, asthma, and beekeepers. Saint Valentine was a clergyman, either a priest or a bishop in the Roman Empire, who ministered to persecuted Christians. He was martyred and his body buried at a Christian cemetery on the Via Flaminia on February 14th, which has been observed as the Feast of Saint Valentine, Saint Valentine's Day, since at least the 8th century. Relics of him were kept in the church and catacombs of San Valentino in Rome, which remained an important pilgrim site throughout the Middle Ages until relics of Saint Valentine were transferred to the church of Santa Pastre during the pontificate of Nicholas. His skull crowned with flowers is exhibited in the Basilica of Santa Maria in the Cosmedian, Rome. Other relics of him are in the Whitfriars Street Carmelite Church, Dublin, Ireland, a popular place of pilgrimage, especially on St. Valentine's Day for those seeking love. At least 2 different Saint Valentines are mentioned in the early martyrologies. For Saint Valentine of Rome, along with Saint Valentine of Turini, abstracts of the acts of the 2 saints were in nearly every church and monastery of Europe, according to Professor Jack B. Urich of the University of Kansas. Saint Valentine is commemorated in the Anglican Communion in the Lutheran churches on February 14th in the Eastern Orthodox Church. He is recognized on July 6th. In addition, the Eastern Orthodox Church observes the feast of Higher Martyr Valentine, Bishop of Intermania, on July 30th. In 1969, the Roman Catholic Church removed his name from the general Roman calendar, leaving his liturgical celebration to local calendars. Though use of the pre-1970 liturgical calendar is authorized under conditions indicated in the Motu Proprio of 2007, the Roman Catholic Church continues to recognize him as a saint, listing him as such in the February 14th entry in the Roman Martyrology, and authorizing liturgical veneration of him on February 14th in any place where that day is not devoted to some other obligatory celebration, in accordance with the rule that on such a day the Mass may be that of any saint listed in the Martyrology of that day. Alright guys, so I'm going to do something I wouldn't normally do, and recommend, if you are not familiar with the story of Cupid and Psyche, that you go ahead and pause this video right now, go over, if it's not on my page, find the story anywhere, and familiarize yourself with the story before we continue. And once you are familiar, you can come back on over to the Hermetic Initiates, and at this point in time, we are going to take this lecture on over to Patreon, and this is where we get into the fun stuff. So, if you have enjoyed today's presentation and you would like to continue going and get into the deep stuff, the good stuff, then you can sign up for my Patreon, and I hope you all have a great day. I appreciate your time with me here today. Can't wait to see you guys there.